Well, can I welcome you to this session? Well, that sounds a bit loud. I hope we can all hear properly. Which is about the changing face of retirement. My name's Nigel Waterson. I'm chairman of the Equity Release Council, which the enthusiasts amongst you will remember used to be called SHIP a while ago. And what this whole session is about is, as I say, retirement, how it's changing, how people living longer is changing things. I always love, there's a apparently true story of Georges Clemenceau, who was, of course, president of France. But years after he'd been president, when he was in his late 90s, he was sitting with a friend in a pavement cafe in Paris, and a beautiful young woman walked past. And Georges turned to his colleague and said, "Ah, I wish I was 80 again." And I think that kind of summarizes the kind of generation, the baby boomers, who are coming up to retirement and into retirement, who have very different expectations of their retirement years. And I'm really pleased I'm sharing this session with Jeff Bromwich of Saga, who will have a lot of interesting stuff to tell us. Saga, I'm pleased to say, are members of the Equity Release Council and very valued members as well. What are the drivers for change that are making these changes to retirement as we know it? Obviously, longevity. I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. We are living a lot longer. If this session lasted an hour, on average, our life expectancies of everyone in this room would go up by 15 minutes, which is a terrifying thought if you're trying to provide pensions or trying to run the economy or whatever. Secondly, employment changes. If I have a political legacy at all, I used to be a politician, but I've been going straight for a few years now. If I have a legacy at all, it's persuading my party to scrap the default retirement age. It was ludicrous that people who were perfectly fit and healthy and able to do their jobs were automatically kicked aside at the age of 65. And that is having a big impact on employment patterns. Thirdly, the baby boomers. And I'm a fully paid up member of that generation. We don't necessarily want to accept what we're given. We're not as accepting as what's called the ration book generation. We have high expectations of our retirement. We worked hard all our lives. We're in much better health than previous generations. We're going to live longer, and we want to have a really interesting retirement, not sitting in a lounge watching daytime TV with a lot of other residents in a care home. Freedom and choice. I'll talk about that as well. The notion since the budget announcements that people will now have much more control over what to do with their pension pot. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, whatever your views on that are, it actually opens up a range of possibilities, particularly for those of you in the financial services sector. Property wealth. Hugely important, I think. When you look at the amount of wealth that is concentrated in the hands of older people, and that process, if anything, is accelerating. Yes, there are difficult consequences for young people trying to get on the housing ladder, but in terms of helping supplement income in later life and pay for those little luxuries and necessities, dipping into property wealth is something that's growing very fast. And finally, I think an overarching concept, which is flexibility. The whole game of retirement has changed and is changing out of all recognition that people are going to be much more flexible. Flexible about working longer, flexible perhaps about taking a part-time job rather than a full-time job, drawing down income from their pension fund, drawing down money from their housing stock, and generally anybody in the financial service industry who can't keep up with this new flexibility that people look for is, I think, going to be in severe difficulties. Longevity. 10 million people already are over 65 years of age. 1 in 3 babies born today will live to be 100. 65% of DWP spending goes on those over working age. Rising demand for long-term care, which is going to be an increasing issue in terms of providing for later life. Dementia sufferers are set to double in number by the middle of the century. projections are that 5.5 million more elderly in 20 years and 19 million by 2050. So that's either going to be people working longer or living from their savings, or being paid for by younger people who will be a shrinking proportion, but still part of the workforce. And really, I want to emphasize this point again. 1.4 trillion estimated housing wealth in the hands of older people. 25%, a quarter of all UK property wealth, is in the hands of the over 60s. A massive resource if it's used sensibly and properly. Now, some other socio-economic issues. Obviously, the recession and low interest rates have hit pensioners very hard. People who saved all their lives were hoping to live off the interest and have been sorely disappointed. Inadequate pension income. The move from DB to DC has meant a lot of people retiring with very disappointing pension pots. My parents' generation were averse to debt in any shape or form, and certainly would have paid off their mortgage by the time they retired. Now there are more and more older people retiring with unpaid mortgages, with significant debts, credit cards and other debts. The interest-only mortgage issue, which has been colourfully set out by the FCA, with 40,000 people, barely half of whom have any plan to pay off the capital. That again is going to be a major problem, and the figures for people in their 60s going bankrupt are surprisingly high and going up all the time. The other side of this coin is the ONS figures about people working beyond 65. It's now well over 1 million people working beyond 65, and that figure is only going to rise. As I said earlier, they may take a job with less responsibility or a part-time job, depending on the flexibilities available with their employer or indeed with another employer. But I think we can fairly say now retirement has slowly become a process rather than a one-off event. Now, the budget. The budget, I think rightly, has focused people's attention on what we all call decumulation, which is the worst word in the world, but we need to find something a bit better. What people do with their pension savings and indeed their wealth in retirement. Yes, the changes will give more freedom to people in how to manage their retirement finances. But how sensibly will they use that freedom? According to the Intergenerational Foundation, about 20% of pension holders plan to use their pots for short-term consumption. And it is quite interesting that having had this system for years in Australia are now looking at going in the opposite direction and bringing in an annuitisation system. And the Institute for Fiscal Studies show that in the long run, this could increase reliance on state benefits. So there is a paradox here, but politically it seems extremely popular. Why wouldn't it be? Telling people they can get their hands on their savings after 55. But I think long term there are real consequences for the public finances. So, increasingly lengthy retirements that have to be funded one way or the other, the average of at least 20 years at the moment. What are consumers going to need? As I said, we're in this brave new world of freedom and choice with pensions. They are going to need access to other additional sources of income in many cases. I mentioned inadequate pension pots. It is an interesting fact that, according to the latest FCA figures, the average DC pension pot is about £17,000, which, if you're lucky and you wanted to buy one of those old-fashioned things called an annuity, might give you £900,000 a year if you're really lucky. So why wouldn't people use it to pay debt or buy a new second-hand car or whatever? And the paradox is that at the same time, the average deal for equity release is 64,000. So there's a whole generation of people. There was a previous generation who had good DB pensions for the most part and have done quite well. There's the coming generation who are part of auto-enrolment. But there is going to be a whole generation for whom their property wealth will be much more significant for their security in retirement than their pension savings. Question of financial education. We see all the talk about the guidance guarantee, so-called. I was talking to somebody from the FCA the other day, and actually, although of course they're worried about people who are totally ignorant about finances, at least the redeeming feature for them is they know they're completely ignorant about finances. Of some worry to the FCA is people who think they know about finances, who see themselves as investors and think they have a grasp of the issues when actually they don't. And the other issue is accumulating debt before retirement, which, as I've said, is a growing factor amongst older people. So, what's the way forward for the financial services sector? First of all, to get to grips with the attitudes and expectations of the baby boomers. There'll be 400,000 people a year on average in the coming years retiring with DC pensions, needing guidance or advice or some sort of help. One needs a really better understanding of these consumer groups and their lifestyles. As I said, these are not people who are going to take what they're given. These are people who have high expectations, are probably relatively fit and mobile, and want to have an interesting retirement. So it's a question of what sort of products will be best suited to their needs. Again, flexibility is the key. New flexible products to cover their needs, things like drawdown for pensions, equity release for property, a kind of combination of ways of using savings in retirement. And I think every firm in the sector will have to sharpen up its act on the advice and the services aimed at these groups, and investing in giving them the kind of broad financial planning they're going to need. I mentioned the guidance guarantee. We're told it'll all be in place by April next year. We shall see. It's clear that it's not going to be delivered by providers. It's going to be delivered by independent people. I think they're going to have quite a job to gear up to provide that level of guidance for people. I think it's really important, first of all, that it includes people's property wealth. It is a nonsense, if you look at the figures I quoted earlier, it's a nonsense if we exclude property wealth, when for many people that's much more significant than their pension savings pot. And my personal view is it's actually rather important that this is a process, not a one-off, or one webinar or something, that people in their mid-50s are starting to be engaged in the system, because, for example, a decision to work beyond 65 could make a huge difference to people's finances in retirement, a much bigger difference than what they do with their pension pot or equity release or whatever. So it's pointless having a guidance guarantee interview at 64 and a half. I think there are major issues about how the guidance guarantee is going to be delivered, whether there are enough people out there to deliver it, and whether there will be a kind of consistency to the process so that everyone's getting much the same level of advice. And also, you can provide all the guidance in the world, but if people don't want to engage, if they don't want to turn up for the interview or turn up for the telephone appointment, or whatever it may be, then they will simply remain outside the system and not getting the guidance or advice that they need or deserve. And it'd be interesting to hear from some of you, perhaps in questions, whether you have some further thoughts about how this guidance guarantee can be delivered. Because there is a central paradox in all of this. The two big strands of government policy at the moment are auto-enrolment, which is based on the assumption people are too lazy and stupid to actually look into any of this, and that by being automatically enrolled into a pension scheme, i.e. by doing absolutely nothing, they will end up in the right place. And we've seen that Nest, for example, almost 100% of the people in the Nest scheme are in the default fund. So it's a double negative, if you like, a double lack of decision. People are auto-enrolled without making a decision, and they're all then put in the default fund because they won't make a decision about that either. But the other strand of policy now, which came out in the budget, is that by the time these same people are nearing retirement, they will be much more informed, much more engaged about the whole system, and will be much better placed to make these rather complex decisions, because there's going to be a raft of new options available for people, which they have to understand and then choose from, hopefully in the right way for their personal needs. So really, that sums up what I wanted to say. There's a slide here just telling you a bit about the Equity Release Council, representing at least 90% of the UK market. We're very keen on setting standards for our members. If somebody deals with one of our members, they get a no negative equity guarantee, independent advice, and a lawyer's sign-off, an independent lawyer's sign-off, and normally security of tenure. So we go to huge lengths to make sure this is a highly protected, advised, and safe process. So I'm happy to deal with questions about that as well. I'm now going to hand over to Jeff Bromwich of Saga, who will pursue some of these topics, I think, and I think we'll have questions, if that's all right, at the end. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning. I want to introduce myself. My name's Jeff Bromwich. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Saga. I'm delighted to be on the stage with Nigel from the Equity Release Council, who I believe do a lot of great work in a similar consumer space that Saga operate. So we're very pleased to be associated with them. I'm going to talk today about the changing face of retirement. I'm going to concentrate probably on a few areas. The first one is I want to spend a bit of time talking about a consumer's view of retirement. So you always have an industry view, but I want to share some things with you about what actually consumers think of retirement, some of their aspirations and perceptions. I then want to move on and talk about some of the external factors that Nigel touched on earlier, around how that's driving behavioural change in this space. And then thirdly, share with you my view of how financial services may well evolve as a result of some of the things we're doing. Retirement's quite a broad thing, and the title today, The Change in Face of Retirement, is quite apt. My view is retirement's always been changing from the year dot, and aspirations, what people are looking for in retirement, will continue to change. What I want to do now is show you a short film that we've put together at Saga, which will set the scene for today's presentation. there's a couple of things I want to set the scene from that film. Firstly, as it demonstrated, retirement has changed over the years. Popular culture has changed, innovation's increased, customers have become more demanding and wanting more things. The key stat on there that I want to draw out is from 1920 to 1980, the retirement age was 62, 63. It moved a year, but in the same period, time in retirement moved over 10 years. So in effect, people are living longer in retirement. So it's gone from being a pipe dream in the early part of the 20th century to now becoming a reality, and the retirement years are actually a fundamentally important part of somebody's life now. If you're retiring in your 60s and living to 100, that's quite a long period of time, and I think that has real implications for financial services, and I'll explain that later. One of the things that we do at Saga is we spend a lot of time talking to customers. Yes, we're a commercial organisation, but a lot of what we do is driven by what we think customers want or consumers. We spend a lot of time doing populace polls. Every month we talk to about 15,000 consumers, asking them their view of the world, asking them things that are important to them. One of the things that strikes me in the retirement space is that actually retirement means very different things to different people. It's talking about Nigel's point around lifestyle and different requirements. There are some people who want the big holidays, want to travel when they're retired. Others want to enjoy the home, utilise their home more. Others cycling, leisure time, enjoying themselves, food and wine, socialising more. Some people worry about care. Some people worry about the deterioration of health. Some people just want to enjoy the garden. The point I'm making here is one size does not fit all. Absolutely, consumers want different things in retirement. They have different aspirations and different perceptions. So therefore, when you're thinking from an FS point of view, you've got to almost segment that retirement base even further and keep reiterating because you need different options for different people. Okay. There are 4 key things I want to pull out. There's a number of different things you can talk about when it comes to what are the drivers for retirement, what are the key points. For me, these are kind of the 4 that I want to draw out. Touching on what Nigel said earlier, people are living longer. We're an over 50s brand. There's 23 million people aged over 50. By 2020, more than 40% of the population. The point I'm making here is it's a powerful group of people, a very powerful group of people. They're more active, they're more aware of their health. They've got more time. They're able to spend that time thinking about their health, putting plans in place, understanding it. They're active in the fact that half the UK expenditure for these areas, recreation, culture, restaurants and hotels, is money spent by the over 50s. So they're actually fueling the economy in a long way. And there's a lot of research that we've published recently that said actually the over 50 segment are arguably one of the reasons why the UK economy has been able to sustain itself through this time of austerity. People are wealthier, and the point I want to make here is let's not view wealth as a pension pot, because as we all know, the average pension pot in the UK is very low. But people are wealthier because they've accumulated assets over the years. So the way that the economy has grown, legislation and policy that's happened in the past has enabled people to buy their own homes, right to buy in the 80s, for instance. So actually people are approaching retirement in a wealthier position, either through accumulated wealth or actually their home and the assets they have there. I think that the key thing to point out here is, whereas historically retirement has been viewed as a one-off, get an annuity, that's it for life, actually retirement now is fluid. Retirement dates shouldn't really exist. People should retire when they're ready to retire. Final point, and I'll touch on this later in the presentation, is people are actually far more aware in this age group. So they're actually socially very active. They've embraced the digital age, and we'll talk about that now. So it's very important when you think about how you communicate, talk to your customers, and how you want them to engage with you. The second point is they're more aware. 76% of the over 65s voted at the last election. It was the largest cohort. Okay, they're more aware, they're passionate, they actually care, they have a view, they have an opinion, and they want to share that. And all these factors are things you need to be considering when you talk about the consumer in retirement. One fundamental point, and Nigel touched on it, there's an expectation, you've probably got it in the room too, I certainly have, about your lifestyle in retirement and what you're working for and how you want that to happen. I think the reality is very different unless people start planning and thinking more carefully about how they want to sustain their life through that process. So, some consumer stuff I want to share with you. So the over 50s values and behaviours are very different from younger cohorts. It's very important you understand that when you're building propositions, when you're interacting with them from an FS point of view. So the first one, I've got a couple of snippets here I want to share with you. So the first one is the over 50s see themselves younger than their age suggests. So Ringo Starr, when he was 24, said, "When I'm 64, I'm going to be really, really old." He was actually quoted when he was 64 as saying, I feel like I'm 24 inside." This is really, really true, and this is research that we've done, and it's been verified. So somebody at 37 views himself as 3 years younger. So I might be 37, you view yourself as 3 years younger. Somebody at 67 actually perceives themselves as 12 years younger. And then when you go right up to the end of the scale, somebody at 82 perceives himself as 13 years younger than they actually are. Now the reason this is important, because then when you think about how you communicate to your customers, how you design propositions or solutions for your customers, what imagery do you use for your customers, you need to bear this in mind. There's a famous brand guru called Martin Lindstrom. I don't know if you've heard of him, and he does a lot of the circuit tours. His view is, if you've designed a leaflet for somebody who's 82, put a 69-year-old person on the front of the leaflet, because that will resonate with that person more than putting somebody their own age. So these are things that we at Saga factor into when we market, when we present information to our clients. The second point I want to draw out is that the over 50s are more likely to be affiliated to a political party compared to the younger generations. So going back to the previous slide about people are more aware, actually what we find is that people are very measured and considered in their views, whether it's politics, whether it's purchasing products or services, but actually once they've made the decision, there is a loyalty there that you won't get in a younger group. So therefore, you engender that loyalty, you engender those customers or those consumers into your brand or into the service that you're offering as an individual. And once they've made their mind up and decided it's fit for purpose, you can guarantee they will stay loyal for a long time. The third area for the consumer I want to talk about is the digital age. 10 years ago, my parents bought a laptop, and my dad used to finger type on the table like this. First time he's ever had a laptop in his life. 10 years on, 88% of people over the age of 50 own a digital device. 88% of people. More than half of people over 70 are on Facebook. They're using social media. There's some stats here that you can see for yourself, but 84% use it mostly for email. People are using it for paying bills. People are shopping around. And actually the social media usage increases in the slightly lower age group, the 50 to 59 and the 60 to 69. So what does this all tell us? It tells us that actually, you know, historically at Saga we've had telephones to deal with customers, we deal by post. Actually, this generation is moving quicker than we realise. They've got more time. They've got more time to do this kind of thing, to sit down. The paradox of that is, because of that, they've got more time to research, they've got more time to compare products, compare services, they can sit down and they can really think about what they want to do before they make a decision. Some interesting stats just to underpin this. Only 27% of the over 50s that we surveyed said that price, the cheapest price, was the driver for them. The rest said they would be prepared to pay more for quality. Another stat that I like to share is that nearly 75% of those that we've polled in one of our polls said that they would never go in a shop if the staff weren't polite or helpful. Very discerning, in essence, very discerning. Have a view, have an opinion, very aware. They've accumulated experience over a long period of time, and therefore they need to be treated with that respect in that way. However, we've got this position at the moment where we've got people who are thinking about retirement or in retirement, wanting to live a lifestyle, whether it's cruising or holidays or house or garden. We've got this awareness coming where they're far more aware, they've access to the digital age, but then we've got this other dynamic going on, which is the external environment, which is the policy, the governmental stuff that Nigel touched on earlier. I don't propose to talk through some of this, but I'll draw some key ones out. This is a steep analysis which looks at kind of that external environment. On the top right in terms of industry, then we are seeing increased regulatory power. We're seeing more focus on consumer protection, which is driving businesses to operate in a certain way. We've seen RDR come along for the wealth businesses. We've seen the budget changes, seen mortgage changes on affordability. Everything is starting to hone in, and that is changing the way that we're starting to think about how we interact with our clients. From a customer viewpoint, I think the key one I want to draw out here is, and it touches on what Nigel said, is the customers are now being told to make those decisions. So from a consumer point of view, that sounds really, really good, but it's almost like it's gone from the decisions are all made for you to now you make your own decisions. So there's a real onus on people in the financial services industry, particularly in this space, to think about how do you support those customers in starting to make those decisions, and what help and guidance, support, and even financial advice can you provide to them to help develop that. From a competitor viewpoint, and I want to draw this out because I think it's very important, it's shifting in my view, and what you're finding now is there are brands that have emerged over the last 10, 15 years that are more consumer-centric. Virgin, for instance, Facebook, Google, Tesco, Sainsbury's, those kind of that interact very regularly with the consumer are starting to realise, hang on a minute, there's a big opportunity over in this kind of retirement space, and you're starting to see them move into it. And I'm sure you've read in the press there's a lot more people coming. And then the final one is the climate, the economic climate, austerity measures, cost of living. It's putting pressure on people. People are having to think about how do they fund either their lifestyle in retirement. If they can't do that, what other things do they need to do to support it? Okay, just going to pull out some key things here because I think this really kind of narrows down the external impact on our area. So the budget announcements that Nigel talked through, I won't ponder on those, but we know it's going to give more flexibility. Mandatory annuitisation will go. That doesn't necessarily mean annuity is a bad thing, but it needs to start being considered in the round with all your other wealth. Pensioner bonds are coming in January. It'll be interesting to see how they impact the industry. You know, if they're offered at the rates they're suggesting, then you could see quite a big shift of savings into pensioners' bonds. And will that then impact people's ability or need to want to invest maybe in other types of products and services? It's one for us to watch. RDR1 and RDR2, retail distribution review. This is about transparency of pricing to the consumer. It's creating a level playing field, so therefore consumers are more aware of what they're getting for their money. It's increasing that shopping around. One of the disadvantages of that is it's impacted in many ways negatively on advice, and I have a view that because of the cost of advice can be quite expensive, consumers are starting to be left with a bit of a gap in terms of where do they turn to. And perversely, my other view is that since the budget announcements, that's kind of saying people need advice. So the very area where they wanted advice and advisors were being forced up market, the retirement piece has actually made that far more prevalent again. So individuals have more responsibility and choice. Awareness, education, help and support will be key. Somebody has to provide that. And if I'm a betting man, I'd say certainly all those brands we talked about on the other slides will be thinking about providing that. We will be at Saga too. So consumers are going to look for that information. They've got the time, they've got the thirst, they're very intelligent, they're going to want to find this information. So those companies that will thrive in the new world of retirement will be those companies who can position that in such a way that the customer understands it and it helps them on that journey. Touched on that, UK demographic, longevity, it's all changing. But the reality for me is that this makes FS quite relevant, more relevant than it's ever been in the past, and I'll talk through what I mean there. So consumers are going to have to manage their in-retirement lifestyle more importantly, so all those things they want to do, all those lifestyle choices they want to make, but they're going to have to fund it. They're going to have to fund it somehow. Your pension pot is not going to do that. All these things, customer needs, they don't change, they'll evolve more. The more time you have in retirement, the media, leisure, it's all going to drive people demanding more, having further and higher aspirations maybe than they've had 100 years ago. The key for this is how can they sustain that, or what elements of it can they sustain. Just want to spend a little bit of time on some of the considerations I think consumers will need to make on FS organisations in trying to support people in retirement. So later life, deterioration of health, if you retire at 65 or 67, you take your pension pot and that's all you've got. It runs out by the time you're 70, or as Nigel said, you buy yourself your car you want. What happens when you need care and support later on in life? And when your health starts to deteriorate, where's that funding coming from? People argue the state are going to provide it. The state will provide some of it, but if you want a standard of living in retirement, then you've got to be thinking about that and considering it. Two areas that I think will merge is longevity and risk. Okay, so in effect, I have a large sum I'm looking to retire, or this is my asset base. How long am I going to live for, and what risk am I prepared to take with what I have? And that's going to be critical, because where we've come from is a decumulation where you can do drawdown and you just put money in, or you take an annuity. Now we're actually giving the customer the choice, and they've got to weigh up all these things that say, hang on, how long am I likely to live for? What do I want to fund in retirement? And how do I then utilize my assets? And then the final piece is customer education, helping them make those decisions. One could argue that the only way you could ever make them help these decisions is by a pure financial advice delivery of service. But that's a challenge. So financial solutions, to Nigel's point, will need to manage these multiple requirements. They need to be flexible. Single product solutions will need to evolve. So historically, where you've just made a decision, that's what I want to do, that's what I'm going to do, those things are gone. Whatever we do in FS is going to have to manage customers throughout their retirement. It's no longer a one-off life stage event. It's actually an ongoing process of managing, supporting those customers throughout their retirement as they face different challenges or needs through that process. So, how do we see it? I think, from my perspective, I see it moving away from single product solutions, but I do see a role to play for a lot of services as they combine and come together. So, using the home, equity release. So equity release, for some people, they spend all their life paying off their mortgage. They have this massive asset in retirement, and all they want to do then is sit on it and give it to their children. Their children generally are making their own way in life and don't actually need it. This is going to become a critical part of funding in retirement. And I think even more so in later life as well, as you start to get into care needs and those things once your other assets have run down. Income guarantee, I think there's a role for annuities. I don't think it'll be 100%, but I think more flexible services and products around annuities are important. 5 years, a 1 year, an escalating, a flexible one, a 50-50 with a drawdown. All these kind of products that don't really exist will need to evolve to give people that income guarantee. So I'm a client, I'm happy for 20% of my income to be fixed. The other 80%, I'm going to take a bit of risk on. I'm going to try and get a return in a different way. So then you're into flexible income, you're into your tax planning, what tax advantages, how do I mitigate my wealth in retirement to benefit me, and then of course your savings and investments and how you utilize that. I think that will become the future. So in our mind we have three main segments. We have the pre-retirement segment, so for me that's the 45s to the late 50s, that's pre-retirement. You have the at-retirement segment, and these are customers who are thinking about that point at which they want to retire. And you have the in-retirement segment, in my view, which are people who are actually fulfilling their lifestyle in retirement. This is prevalent for all of them, absolutely all of them. If we do that, then you've got some chance of consumers wanting to live their life the way they want. And of course, and I can't reiterate it harder, when your assets run out, when your money runs out, where are you going to turn to do that? The state aren't going to provide it, and that's where I think equity release will morph and evolve and become far more flexible, and rather than, like other areas like investments, being one-off transactions, it will all come together and it will be a plan for retirement, the retirement plan. Thank you.